morning. How is everybody doing? I would say happy Monday. I feel like, I don't know, wasn't a terribly happy weekend, but hopefully, hopefully y'all are doing well wherever you are. Um, let's see, got a couple of stragglers here. Um, all right, so well, let's get going. Week 3, law school. You guys are still in it. Are there any questions? Anything you guys want to raise real quick before we move into regular old class? Questions, concerns? Good? Everybody's all right? Taking care of yourself, ready to roll? Okay. So I think towards the end of class on Wednesday, we were talking about this idea of constructive possession. And so I want to begin with these problems real quick on page 33 and 34 before we get into the cases for today. And what I am wanting us to focus on is the relativity of the interests that people have. You know, if I'm tracing us back to Jacques v. Steenberg and State v. Shack, and really the Whale and Fox case make the same suggestion, I'm trying to introduce this idea and really hammer it home that rights in property depend in large part on who you're asserting the rights against. So it's very difficult to say that someone owns something or, you know, it is that person's without the second half of that sentence, which is own something more than someone else. Okay. And so that is what I want to focus in on with these problems. Okay. So the first one, I think I might have introduced it a little bit towards the end of class, involves an individual who trespasses onto someone else's land, onto O's land, and captures a wild animal. We'll just say it's a fox, and then brings home the animal and puts it in a pen. And we spent a lot of time on Wednesday talking about what it would take to capture a wild animal and to make it yours. But we completely left out this concept of what if you were on someone else's property when all of that happened, okay? And so here we have essentially the post character following the fox onto someone else's land, so someone who's absent from the Pearson v. Post case, and capturing it there, okay? And then bringing it home and putting it into a pen. So in this instance, if we're using the Pearson v. Post rule, where you have to deprive it of natural liberty, capture it, and demonstrate your continued intent to own it, it seems like T in this example has done that. But let's see, and I apologize if I already asked you guys this. Who you think owns this thing, A for T or B for O? I know that's confusing, sorry. A for T, B for O. And again, sometimes, I'm teaching this class to both sections, and so sometimes I lose track of what I did in which class. I don't know if did I ask you guys this question and do a poll already? All right, well, here we go again. Okay, well, and I think that the results are pretty consistent here with what we had last time, which is most of you are recognizing that O is the owner. It has the superior right in this particular problem. And so why? What is it that's driving us towards this? There's a couple of different things. What is it that's driving us towards O? Yeah, Jack, you're in my screen, so I'm calling on you.
The fact that he is the actual owner of the property. I think we kind of touched on that, how that creates constructive possession, even if he didn't know the animal was there. And even if the guy who caught the animal who was trespassing did gain possession of the animal from a definitional standpoint.
Yeah, and so can you connect constructive possession to the right to exclude? Because here O doesn't know that the fox is even there. So how can O have a right to something that O doesn't even know exists?
Are you asking me again?
Sure.
Um, so um, and we touched on it. I stayed after class a little bit, and you did mention that. I'm just having trouble connecting it to the right to exclude part. I don't know if someone else would do a better job.
Yeah, Tierney, what do you think?
It's the idea of is it rational soli?
Yeah, so that's the idea. So how does that connect to the right to exclude? So what we're
Um,
saying is O doesn't know that this fox is on O's property, but I think most of you are saying, and I think that you're correct, that because of rationale soli or constructive possession, O has superior rights. Um, and I just want to try to connect that's the answer, but connect the concept back to right to exclude.
so I own things on my property even if I don't know it's on my property,
Because,
and
yeah, good.
they have a superior right to things on their property when it enters their property,
Mm-hmm.
and
Because
so
connected to the right
because
to exclude. You're right there, right? I have superior rights to things that are on my property, even if I don't know they're on my property, because, and now I'm asking you to connect it to the right to exclude. Because what can I do?
I can I have the right to keep you off of my property. So
Right.
um I guess does he unlawfully gain possession? Does that make it not his?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you're getting there, so I'm just going to sort of state it a little more directly. Because I can keep you off my property, even though I don't know this fox is on my property, I have a superior right to this fox. And so the right to exclude is a really crucial part of this idea of constructive possession, because it is the right to exclude that is the key that allows for O in this instance to claim ownership, superior ownership rights to something that O doesn't even know exists. Okay. So then we might have done this one a little bit also. What if what happens is T trespasses the same story, T takes it back and puts it in the pen, and then T1 trespasses and takes the animal from T's pen, T versus T1. Did we do this poll also? And what'd y'all say? It's T. Put it in the chat if you want. Right, it's T. The same basic point, right? Even though T would lose to O, T has superior rights to T1 for the exact same reasons. Here, it's not really constructive possession, it's actual possession. T has actual possession, captured this thing. We don't have to invent this fiction, because, right, if we think about constructive possession, it is fictional, right? There's no possession. In no way does O have, in the first example here, in no way does O have actual possession of the fox. It's constructive. And in the second example, we don't have to do constructive possession. T has actual possession of the thing, and T1 has no rights to it. And so even though T is wrongdoer in the first example, even though T has no rights that are superior to O's, T does have rights that are superior to T's. Did I ask y'all this one? No, I'm seeing blank faces. Okay. What if it had been O that had come back and reclaimed it from T off of T's property? So instead of T1, now we have O is the secondary trespasser. So here we'll do the poll while you guys are thinking about it. Let's go A for T and B for O. So in the first example, y'all said O was having superior rights over T. In the second example, we're asking the same question, T versus O. Hopefully y'all are seeing it's a little more complicated in the second example. Got most of you in. Anyone want to get their last second vote in to try to tighten it up? A is T, B is O. All right, so still most of you, more of you are saying it's O's instead of T's, but it's closer. So somebody fill me in. What is making this more complicated in this case than it was in the initial contest between T and O? Matthew.
If constructive possession is like great enough to say that I didn't know it was on my land, but then someone told me you came and took it, so I'm gonna come take it back. If that's enough to give you like the ownership of the wild animal, even though you didn't know it was there to begin with.
In that instance, you're talking about to give O the right.
The right to go back and take it.
Right. So if O had resorted to the legal system in this example, O was going to win. I think many of you said that, and we talked about constructive possession. But now the question is a little bit different, Matthew. And so the question is, in this instance, we have whether is this sort of what you're asking as the answer? Is constructive possession so powerful that not only does it allow you to win in this instance, it allows you to go onto someone else's property and take back your fox? Is that
right? Yeah.
And you think it is or it is not?
I said it was.
It was. So you think O still wins in this instance?
Mm-hmm.
What if O damages T's property in the process?
I think you'd be liable for that because he only had a right to the wild animal, not to the other property that was never his to begin with.
Could O be charged with trespass and get a $30 citation for doing this?
For the damage.
Or whatever the
yeah.
So you the first question was, if O damages T's property, would O be liable? You said yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, what if he's charged criminally with trespass? O is. Could O be charged and found guilty of trespass and charged with the $30 fine, which is I think what we had in the other cases? Would he be guilty of trespass?
I think so. If he did damage to something other than what he was trying to take back.
What if he didn't do damage? No guilty of trespass. Not guilty of trespass.
I don't think so.
Okay, why not?
Because he had a right to that animal. It was his possession, so he was going to get it back.
Okay, so he had a right to the animal, but what did he not have a right to do?
The guy's land.
Okay, so are you sticking with he's not guilty even if he doesn't cause damage?
No, he probably would be.
Yeah, probably would be. So what I'm trying to tease out here is that I think y'all are right that O has superior rights in the fox, but I think we're wrong that, not wrong, I just want to point out that O does not have the right to just go on to the property. And so this instinct that Matthew is bringing out, that the trespass is still wrongful and therefore could lead to criminal liability and certainly could lead to tort damages in the event that damage is caused to T's land, is those are all true, right? O had superior rights up in the beginning, and O cannot trespass and would be liable and or guilty in civil or criminal trespass cases. So the question then becomes, is self-help that O has done here so we want to discourage it so much that O might forfeit the rights that they had up here by trespassing? Does anybody think that maybe that's the position that those of you who said that this fox here should belong to T, maybe that was the position that you guys took? Thomas, I see your hand.
Yes, sir. I voted for T in the second instance because we said that the right to exclude superseded uh, the faire nature of the animal that T occupied from the first example. So if O is trespassing, he's breaking the right to exclude from T in the second example, then it's kind of supersedes the property issue because he's breaking a stronger property issue to start.
I'm not sure. I don't know about supersedes. Why can't they both be true? What Matthew's telling us, it goes to O because that was who it went to in the first place, and O is liable for trespass, right? So I don't know that we need to have anything supersede anything else. Why can't they both be true at the same time and just say, okay, it's O's fox, but O has to pay for damage caused to the property, and O might have a fine for being, for being a criminal trespasser.
Well, I would argue that like we got out of the text, that you cannot own a wild animal, especially if O was unaware of the animal's presence. And who's to say that T didn't capture or be within reasonable certainty of capture of the animal before he got on O's land?
Who did you vote for the first time, T or O?
I voted for T the first time.
Okay, so you're a strong. You don't believe in constructive possession, basically.
If he's unaware.
Yeah, right. So I think that constructive possession. So when I say you don't believe in constructive possession, I don't mean to say you're wrong, except that there is such thing as constructive possession. So you actually are wrong, but but you're not wrong in the sense that constructive possession should or is an absolute truth, right? Constructive possession is a theory upon which the right to exclude is utilized to give rights, in this kind of example, to property owners, to discourage trespass, essentially, is what constructive possession is there for. It doesn't override the fact that O has no moral claim to this fox, independent of O's ownership of O's land, right? O has done nothing to possess this fox except own a bunch of land that the fox happens to walk across. O hasn't set, food out to lure foxes. O has done nothing. And so what I'm hearing, Thomas, and if I'm overstating it, I apologize, is that you just don't like the idea of constructive possession in the first place. You would much rather go back to the kind of conversation we had between Pearson and Post, which is about the work and the labor and the actual possession. Am I stating your position maybe a little more extremely than you would, but fairly?
Yes, sir. Constructive possession has given society problems since feudal days, especially with capitalist issues. Ownership of the land it creates more issues than it does to the Commonwealth. So I would argue strongly against it.
Okay, so I think that I love hearing those arguments, but I want everybody else in the class to hear that constructive possession and rationale soli I think that those of you who voted for O, it will be the outcome, right? I love the dialogue and the discussion about should it be, is this a good idea, etc. I think that's really important. But I don't want y'all to get confused in this conversation. Constructive possession does win out. And I see a question, Annie, in the chat. I'm going to call on you in just a second. The question that I'm trying to raise here is constructive possession so powerful as to survive into this world and give O license to come back and take the fox? I think that the answer to that is yes. Okay, I think that the answer to that is yes. O has the right to reclaim the fox through the legal system. And the fact that O has self-helped is not sufficiently bad to prevent O's, to undo the victory that O would have had up here, if that's making sense. Annie, question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, does the right, like, if T had taken the fox and put it like in the bed of his truck, and O had come and taken it, does the right to exclude extend to personal property? I guess
Probably.
Okay.
Probably. And in fact, it extends, and this is the Vanna White case, it extends to intellectual property as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so one more of these, and then we'll get into the cases. Here, this is the third question. T trespasses, captures a wild animal on the land of O, brings home, and at this point, O is out. We're not going to even have O be present in this case any longer. Brings home and puts it in the pen. Then what happens is that the animal escapes, okay? And X finds it on, let's say, X's land and captures it. So T is the first to capture, but then the animal escapes. X then captures. Okay, so this is question 3. And so in this instance, we'll do A is the polling showing up for you guys? No, right. Share results. Something's up with the polling. Okay, so just type it in to the chat real quick if you think it's T or X, and I'll just kind of do a check, right? So I'm seeing a lot of X's. There's a T in there somewhere. I saw one. So most everybody's putting X. Yes, it failed to launch polling. Thanks, Zoom. So mostly I'm seeing X's. There's safety in numbers. Those of you who put X, and I think that this is, so why? What is it about this situation that says, even though T was the first to capture, right? If T was the first to capture, we would say first to capture gets the right, but y'all are saying that it is that is X that is going to win this. Let's see. I see, Chatavia, you're unmuted. Is that because you want to say something?
I will. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think
So why do you think it's X?
because T never had complete domain over it because he took it.
But T did put it in a pen. So is that not good enough?
I would argue that it's not because he took it from someone else.
Okay, but that someone else is not here. So we're not worried about, does T have rights against O? O never knew this happened, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying because T took it from someone else in the first place, T is wrongdoer and T can never, have superior rights. Is that?
Well, no, I guess I could go further and say that I would have more questions. The animal escaped. How far did it escape? Was it away further enough from T's pen that he doesn't have possession over it anymore?
So okay, good. So let's say it went far enough that it exited T's property. So it escaped from the pen and it escaped T's property. So
it's still X. I would still say it belongs to X.
You still think X, okay? And so the question then is why? So your initial thought was it's X because T has no rights in the first place, right? Okay, so, and I'm telling you, maybe against O, T has no rights in the first place, but T certainly possessed it first before X did. So why shouldn't T defeat X? Why should X have superior rights here?
Because the animal escaped. X didn't necessarily take it. He found it. Maybe that could be an argument. Okay,
good. So it escaped. So Alana, I see your hand up too. Can you build on that a little bit? What is it about what happens that y'all are right? It's X. Okay, so so I'm not trying to confuse things. I just want y'all to be able to identify why. So Alana, what is it about what happened, the escape by the fox, that gives it to X over T in this example?
So my thought process was in comparison to the property rights of T versus X, not O, because the rights are relative, that because it's a wild animal, once it escapes from the pen, and I think X then loses possession at that point. It's not in his control. He doesn't know where it is. And then because it entered the land of, or I'm sorry, T lost control. And so because it entered the land of X, then X got constructive possession, and T had lost the possession once it was out of his control because it's a wild animal.
Great. So the what we're trying to identify here is it possible for someone to have rights and then lose rights? Okay, because if X had come onto T's property, Alana, just stick with you for a second. If X had come onto T's property and taken the fox, then who would win between T and X?
I believe T would maintain possession.
T, right? T would win. So there is a moment in time in this story when T has superior rights to X, right? So long as the fox is confined and on T's property and within T's domain, if you will, as long as that's the case, T has superior rights to X. But something happens when that animal escapes. And so what we're trying to figure out is, can something that had been owned become wild again? Okay. And so, Alana, you're saying yes. Shatavia, you're also saying yes, it becomes wild again. And then when X captures, it's as though X is the first to capture again. Is that fair? I'm looking at you guys. I know you can't see that I can see you. But yeah, okay. So, all right. Are there things T might have done that would change your answer on that question? Anybody? David, I don't know. I know your hand has been up. Is there anything that T might have done?
Yeah, my reasoning for choosing X in this was not what T had done, but what T did not do.
Okay. So what could T have done?
In the number 3 in the book, I don't know if this is if I have the right copy, but I think I do. It mentions that the T equivalent set traps to try and recapture the animal.
Okay.
And in your hypothetical, T did not. So that's why I sort of switched from, I probably would have said T initially, but I switched from T to X because of that lack of trying to reclaim,
Right. And that kind of that thought, right? The effort that T was making should remind us of the watch, right? The watch, the signs that someone put up or didn't put up, or the length of time that the signs were up, might have did impact the way you guys felt about who owned the watch that had been found. Okay, what else, Hunter? I don't know if you're responding to that. What else could T have done besides just putting, setting out traps?
I think if he would have like it might sound silly thinking of it as like a fox, but like put a collar on it, like show that he's at least attempting to like domesticate this animal.
What would that collar have signaled to X?
That wild animal is possessed by somebody.
Good. So there would have been possession over it. There would have been notice to others, kind of like making a police report. There would have been notice to others that this fox is not what, Hunter?
It's not wild.
Not a wild fox. And so X would not have thought, oh, hey, I just encountered a wild fox. X would have thought, oh, hey, I just encountered a fox that has a collar on it. That's strange. It must belong to someone. Okay. And so, think of that as like the bomb lance being stuck to the whale, right? A mark of appropriation that's signaling to the world that this is my whale. This is my fox. Okay. Absent that, what is X thinking, Hunter?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Without the mark of appropriation, the collar, what would X be thinking when they encountered this fox?
That it's just a wild fox on my property.
Right.
That's up for grabs.
Right. And so I want you all to hear this phrase. I'm going to call X in this example a good faith capturer. Okay. We're going to see later the idea of a good faith finder or a good faith purchaser. and that good faith on the part of a subsequent possessor of property, right? X is a subsequent possessor of this fox. And generally speaking, we like to favor the prior possessors, the first in times. But sometimes there are situations where if the second possessor, the subsequent possessor, is a possessor in good faith, that means they have no reason to think that this has been owned by someone else, or that there's something funky about it coming into their possession. When a subsequent possessor does so in good faith, they might have the opportunity to obtain rights superior to the first in time possessor. So in this instance, T is the first in time possessor, X is the subsequent possessor, X possesses in good faith because there's no marks of appropriation. Going back to David's point, maybe also because T hasn't taken the steps to put the world on notice through traps of a desire to continue pursuing this animal, and therefore X might win. The problem in the book, I'm going to open for questions in just a second. The problem in the book, though, was a little bit different than the problem that I just gave you guys. And the difference was that the fox, or I don't even know what kind of, is it a fox? Yeah, silver gray foxes. The fox was imported in from another part of the country, okay? So what difference would that make? Because I'm going to assert to you that that actually means that this is going to go to the T character in the actual problem in the book. What difference does it make that there is a fox that is from another part of the country? So Dalton, I saw your hand up here first.
So if the fox is from a different part of the country and it's not native to that area, if you see an animal like that, it would not be like, it'd be kind of weird. Like, it wouldn't just be like normal, you're just finding a fox. Like, it would be understandable to think that this fox is not here naturally.
And therefore, what is the subsequent possessor, the X character, what should be going through their mind?
At that point, the subsequent possessor would be thinking that this fox does belong to somebody, because why else would it be there?
Good. Jasky, do you want to build on that?
Yeah. Yeah, so my thought process was that since it's imported, that means that it has no natural habitat in where it is. And it's, so basically I would say that now, since it doesn't have one anymore, that its new kind of natural habitat would be the property in which it was brought on to be on. So for our case with T, since it would be kind of assumed that, okay, I have provisions on my property for this thing to be able to like survive and exist, then that would kind of give it like its new natural property instead of, not having one, because it can't be where it usually is.
Good. So I think both of you guys are making the right points here, which are essentially, this is not a wild fox any longer. And taking it from the perspective of the X character, the subsequent possessor, they should be on notice that this has been owned before, or is owned, right? It's not native to this area, and therefore they cannot be a good faith subsequent possessor or good faith second capture. And since they can't be a good faith second capture because they're on notice that something's up, then they can't get rights superior to the prior possessor or the prior capturer. Okay? So all of this is meant to demonstrate, right, like that the rights between T and X not only are relative, okay, that, the T character in all of these examples is demonstrating to us that the rights are relative. And Alana, I think you made that point well, and I'm glad that you sort of made it explicitly, because that's what I want y'all to be hearing. Rights are relative, rights are relative. But also note that in the example that we first went through versus this example with the non-native silver gray foxes, the facts are leading to entirely different outcomes, right? whether the fox is native or whether the fox is not native makes a difference in whether or not the X character can be a good faith capturer, a subsequent capturer. And so those are the two main things I want y'all to sort of accept as you sort of begin sort of building into law school, is that property rights are relative and facts matter immensely, right? That variable that the foxes were not native to the area is the difference between who wins this case, T or X. If it's native to the area, then X wins because it's a wild animal. If it's not native to the area, then T wins, because even though it's a wild animal that is unnaturally present. Okay. Questions? Cooper, I saw your hand up a little while ago. I don't know if you had a question or.
I had a question just regarding, even though, so they're wild animals, but is there any way, you mentioned marks of appropriation like a collar, but is there any way to file that, like, you know, like buying a pet? Is there any way to basically get paperwork or any kind of a written documentation for a wild animal?
I don't know. I mean, note that a pet and a wild animal are different, but pets are more traditionally like regular property. They don't have the same tendency to become wild again in the way that a wild animal would. But to be frank, I just don't know. I don't have a lot of experience capturing wild animals, but I suspect that there are things one could do to put the world on notice that this is your fox, for example.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Hunter and then Alana, I see y'all's hands.
Okay, so how does the fact that like the fox isn't native put you on notice? Because like I don't know what animals are native to Tennessee and what aren't. So like if I own some land and I see one of these like silver gray foxes coming by, like, and I capture it, how am I supposed to know at that point that this isn't native? And so like how does that discount my right to the animal?
So you are charged with that knowledge. I suppose that the answer would be you're given what's known as constructive notice, as that the knowledge of a reasonable capturer of foxes. And so I'm assuming, Hunter, from this comment that you are not a regular capturer of foxes. I'm not either. I wouldn't know what foxes are native and what foxes are not native. I suppose if it was a tiger, I would have a pretty good sense that it was not native. But in terms of species of fox, I don't know which ones are from Minnesota and which ones are from Mississippi. But presumably someone in the business of fox catching would know. And since what you are doing is fox catching, you're charged with the knowledge of a reasonable fox catcher. And so that doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It just means that if T comes calling, you're gonna have to give the fox back.
Okay.
That makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Alana?
My question builds off of Cooper's a little bit. My thought process was for people who say are researchers who they like to collect the data based on where animals go and they track them. So there would be a way to reasonably discern that someone else has maybe acquired possession of this wild animal, but that isn't the intention of those researchers. How does that factor into who would have possession? Is it still considered a wild animal at that point since they release it for the purpose of entering back into their habitat?
Yeah, and I'm thinking of, I know that with my kids one year we went and like marked turtles. And the point was not to claim ownership of the turtles, but so that researchers, when they, refound the turtles, then they could know which turtle they were looking at. I know that that could happen with geo trackers also. You could put a geo tracker onto a wild animal without trying to claim it as ownership. And so I think that if the intent, so I guess I'll put it back on you, Alana, if the intent of the mark of appropriation, the geo tracker or like a little band on a turtle leg or something like that, if it's not an intent to claim ownership, then why would you, the person, the researcher, be able to claim ownership just because someone else captured the turtle or whatever other animal?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that you could then claim ownership, but I think that it would have a direct correlation to someone's ability to be a good faith capturer. Because if you came across an animal that had that, how are you supposed to be able to discern what the purpose of that was?
And so you would say it would this is good point and good sort of cutting of it. It would maybe impact whether or not the person who came upon it was a good faith capturer and therefore their rights versus a subsequent capturer, right? That's what you're saying? Yeah.
Well, yeah. How would they be able to then determine that they then possess the rights at that point on a good basis?
So the question a couple of you guys are asking this, how would I know, right? Like I'm asking these questions in a law school course, right? If you're actually out in the field, how do you know what your rights are? You don't really, you don't know until it's reduced to a law school classroom. But I think that the answer, and this may not be satisfactory to you, but I think that the answer is if the rights are relative and the good faith capturer rule applies, it only applies in a situation where the prior capturer can claim ownership. If the prior capturer can't claim ownership, then the subsequent capturer doesn't have to be a good faith capturer. So if I'm just sort of fast forwarding into the abandonment case, the Hawkins case, right? If I abandon it, so let's say I had a fox and I put a collar on it and I then took steps to abandon the fox, right? I went on television, I said, I abandoned my rights in this fox and I set the fox free, and then somebody else found the fox. They wouldn't have to be a good faith capturer in order to beat me because I had relinquished my rights. And so if the researchers aren't claiming their rights in the first place, then the good faith isn't as important, if that makes sense. Okay? All right. Other questions on these problems? All right. So kind of this last problem is really transitioning us into the abandonment case. Really, what we're, if Pearson v. Post and these problems are kind of like, how do you acquire a right? The third problem is like, can you lose that right once it's acquired? Or can you, in the Hawkins case, abandon it? So before we go into Hawkins, I want to make two real quick introductory points. One, the general rule in American law is that you cannot abandon real property. So if you have land, you cannot abandon it. Part of the justification for that is that there are responsibilities that go along with land ownership, payment of property taxes being one, liability for people being injured on your property being another, that you cannot abandon. So even if you aren't on your property and you want to abandon your property, real property, you can't do it, okay? So one introductory rule is you cannot abandon real property. Another introductory rule is you can abandon personal property or chattel, okay? So the exact opposite situation. You can abandon anything else except real property, okay? So I just want y'all to know that because it kind of influences the discussion that we're going to have here with the Hawkins case. Okay, so let's turn to Hawkins, which is a case about abandonment, and is going to give us this idea, some more thoughts about acquiring rights and acquiring rights to things that had previously been owned. Okay, so if we're starting with wild foxes and wild whales, those are things that had never been owned before. But if we're dealing with watches or foxes that have been captured and marked for appropriation, or my belongings, when I'm in prison, we're dealing now with things that have been priorly owned. And the question is, what happens? Can you acquire rights to things, or how do you acquire rights to things that have been previously, possessed or owned? Okay, so let's talk Hawkins. Nicole, I'm going to call on you to give us the story, just so we're all on the same page. Just briefly let us know the what's going on here in this situation.
Okay. So our plaintiff here is Sherman Hawkins, and he was an inmate at Montana State Prison. On July 12th, 1997, he escaped from prison. Now, the state prison's policy on property is that once a prisoner escapes, he essentially abandons that property. And so it's boxed up and placed in storage. But on July 14th, 1997, the plaintiff was found and returned to prison to face a higher sentence. I don't know if it's stated exactly, but maximum security. And then, so the defendant, the Mahoney, who I believe is representing the prison, yes.
Mm-hmm.
He informs Sherman that his property is considered abandoned and it's now property of the state. And the plaintiff keeps requesting for his property to be returned to him, saying that he didn't technically abandon it because he was only gone for a couple of days. So Hawkins files a suit against the prison for destroying his property without affording him due process of the law. And he alleges that since he was gone for only 2 days, it could still have been returned to him. And that because the property had not been sold or distributed among other people, it technically was still in his name, because it hadn't, there was no transfer of ownership because the prison wasn't using it and no one else had purchased or was in use of his property.
So this is a give me my stuff kind of case, just like Pearson v. Post is a give me my stuff kind of case. And you're articulating it, but I want you to fill it out a little bit. So Hawkins's theory here is that it was his stuff, it is his stuff, and will always be his stuff. Is that what he's saying?
I think he's saying it is his stuff because, and I was a little unclear. It mentioned that he never had the intent to abandon his property, even though he clearly left it at the prison. But because he was only gone for 2 days, he alleged that he wasn't gone long enough for him to lose ownership of his property.
Okay. You mentioned intent. Do you pick up on what it takes to abandon something? Yale or Carly, did either of you guys pick up on what it takes to abandon something? Nicole mentioned intent, and I mentioned the reason that triggered is because that's important.
I wrote down 3 elements for abandonment. I said owner intends to relinquish all interest.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind who it falls upon, and the relinquishment is voluntary.
Okay. And when you say the relinquishment, what does that look like?
Can you say that again?
What does relinquishment look like? Is it something that just happens in my mind?
No, it's like a physical detachment from the property. So you purposely leave it behind somewhere, or you physically remove yourself from it.
Right. So we need what Nicole has hit on, which is an intent, and we need what Yale is hitting on, an act. Okay. In order for abandonment to actually make my sticks go away, right? So if I have sticks to all my stuff, if I want to abandon something and release my sticks, I have to want to do it mentally, intent, but I also have to act on it. So every act of abandonment requires an intent and an act, or every abandoning of my property rights requires those things. So Nicole, if you're Hawkins, he's saying what didn't happen here?
That he didn't intend to abandon his property.
Great. So he's saying, I never intended to abandon my property. I just intended to escape from prison. That those two things are distinct, and that I still considered it my property, even though, I ran away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, Carly, can you build out a little bit what the prison is saying? What do they think has happened in this instance?
They're saying that because had he not been caught, he never would have come back for it.
Okay. And so what are they saying about his intent?
That he had no intent, that his intent was to abandon his property.
Okay. And did he do an act?
Yeah, he escaped from prison. He left.
He ran away, right? If Yale says physically separating yourself from the property, he was trying to get as far away from this property as possible. Okay. And so the state says you did abandon it, and therefore what? Therefore what now?
That the property belongs to them and they can do whatever they want with it.
Okay. And what have they done with it? Go ahead. You just said it.
Sell or destroy it.
They can sell, destroy it. They can do whatever they want, right? How would they? So, Carly, let me ask you a little more broad of a question. How would you? Let's say that Hawkins had a fox, okay, and that was part of his property. How would they establish ownership of the fox? The state. Right, so the fox is in the Hawkins box. Let's make it a dead fox just for our purposes. It'll make it a little easier. Hawkins has a dead fox skin in the Hawkins box while he's in prison. Okay, it actually was like a TV and all this other stuff. It was really kind of, it was a little confusing to me why he had $2,500 worth of property in a box while in prison. But leave that aside. Let's say it's a fox. What would they need to do to, if it was abandoned, that's their theory, what would they need to do in order to make it theirs? I'm using fox only because we've talked about establishing ownership of a fox. But how would you establish ownership of an abandoned TV, for example?
Well, if it was abandoned, would they just have to express ownership as in like they're claiming it as theirs?
And then claim it as theirs and then do what with it? If I see a TV that somebody has discarded by their trash can, I can walk by and claim it as mine, but what do I really need to do?
Take it into your possession.
Take it into my possession. Just like in Pearson v. Post, what they need to do is take the fox into their possession to establish the rights. So too here, what the state needs to do is take it into their, if it's abandoned property, then it can become owned by me if I intend to take it in possession and, in fact, take it into possession. And so, Carly, the state says what have they done in this instance?
They've taken it into their possession.
And therefore?
That the property is theirs.
The property is theirs. And so the fact that Hawkins comes back, what difference does that make?
In the state's opinion,
from the state's perspective,
it doesn't make a difference.
Why not?
Because of his intent. Had he not been caught, he wouldn't have come back for it.
Right. And so it was abandoned. And in the interim between when he is now claiming his property and when he had abandoned his property, what has the state done?
Taken his property.
Yeah, it's theirs, right? He abandoned, they claimed it. Now he's coming back and saying, give me back my property. And they're saying, no, 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 you abandoned your property. Okay. So, a couple of quick points. One, the state's theory is exactly right here. When someone abandons property, they relinquish their rights to the property. The property becomes titleless, without title, and is reduced to property again in the same way as if it had never been titled before, ever. Okay? And so in this instance, you would take possession of it, express an intent to make it yours. Okay? Those are the things that you would do. So abandoned property becomes titleless and falls back into the, it's never had title before. Anybody can claim it. Okay? And anyone can claim it the way that you claim anything else. Okay? Or anything that's sort of natural and wild. So, Yale, how could it be that, well, Yale, what's the outcome in this case? Who gets the property?
So at the trial level, they cite Heron and say that it's the state's property, and then Hawkins appeals, and the case ultimately is reversed, and he was awarded his property.
Okay,
Well,
so
it was
how could
destroyed,
that be?
but he was rewarded
How could
damages.
that be? Nicole has said that Hawkins says, I didn't abandon my property. But Carly, I think, made a pretty compelling case that he did abandon the property. Okay? So how could it be that he did abandon the property, but he still wins this case?
It's because he unabandoned his property, because they say the prison never fully claimed the property, because they put it in boxes with Hawkins' name on it. They put security tape on it to make sure no one went into it. And then they put it in storage. They didn't actually claim it for themselves. They just put it in storage for Hawkins and never made an official claim on it.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to slow this down for us for a second. So at first we were talking about, did Hawkins abandon this stuff? And we said you have to have an intent to abandon, and you have to have a action of abandonment. So Yale, did Hawkins abandon this stuff?
Yes.
Okay, good. Then when I was speaking, and so that's the prison wins, right? The prison wins on that point. Hawkins did abandon the stuff. Then I said, well, abandoned stuff falls into the universe of untitled property, stuff that doesn't have rights attached to it. And what does one have to do in order to establish ownership? And this was the dialogue with Carly. You must have an intent to claim it and essentially take possession of it, right? There's no doubt that, well, I guess, which of those did the prison fail on, Yale? Which
They
of those?
failed on taking it, the claim.
So if the two parts are an intent to claim as mine and taking actual possession, which one did the prison fail on?
I personally think they failed on both, because they didn't, I guess they physically took it because they took it out of the cell, but they failed on the intent because they put it in boxes labeled with Hawkins.
Great. So good. They definitely didn't fail on both. They took the physical possession. But what was missing when they took the physical possession and they put it in boxes with Hawkins' name on it, right? This is the killer fact for the prison here. They put Hawkins' name on the box. What does that suggest about their intent when they took possession?
It shows that their intent is to just keep it as Hawkins' property in storage.
Good. And so since they did not claim it, what happened when Hawkins came back?
Hawkins asked for his property back, and they didn't give it to him.
Let me back up. When they put it in storage with Hawkins's name on it. Who owned the property?
No one,
No one. Why?
because it was abandoned, so it was titleless.
Abandoned and titleless, and the state had failed what?
They failed to intend to take it.
Right, so they hadn't titled it. So it was as though they just saw something nice and kept it in safekeeping. That they did not have a claim of ownership. If someone had, I'm going to complicate this for you guys. Nicole, if someone had broken into the prison and stolen the stuff out of Hawkins's box, and then that person was caught, and there was a lawsuit between the prison and that thief, who would win for the stuff?
I believe the thief would, because if like the property didn't belong to anyone.
Okay,
No.
but Carly, what do you think? The thief breaks in, steals the Hawkins box. This is not Hawkins that breaks in. The prison says, hey, and then they catch him, and there's this contest over the Hawkins box between the prison and this new thief. Who wins?
I think the state would win.
So Nicole says that the thief would win because it was titleless, and she's right that it was titleless, but Carly, you think the state would win. Why?
Because by keeping it in a storage room in their prison, they have it in their possession.
Right. They don't even have to do constructive possession and tick off Thomas. They have actual possession, right? So we have a trespass here, and this is clearly wrong by the thief. Okay, the thief has no call on this. So if we're talking about a contest between this new thief and the state, clearly the state has superior rights, even though they are not owners, quote unquote, of this property. Okay, so now Yale, back to you. It was not owned by anyone, you're saying, at that point. But clearly the state had some rights to it because they would have rights to assert over this new thief. Okay, so in this interim, July, whatever, 12th through 14th, it's not owned by anyone. And so how does Hawkins end up winning this case, according to the court?
He ends up winning because once he comes back on the 14th, he asks for his property back, and the court rules that is him unabandoning his property.
Okay, so forget unabandoning, because it's really, you can't unabandon. Okay. So the concept is right. So y'all can hear, if it makes it easier for y'all to think of this as unabandoning, then that's fine. But really what he's doing is what? He's not, if you can't unabandon, because it's out there.
He's just reclaiming it.
He's reclaiming it, but more importantly, he is claiming it. Okay, and he is doing what, right? So with Carly, we talked about what you would do in order to make it yours. And you said, and we said intent and take it into possession. You said the state failed on the intent element, right?
Correct.
So what did he do?
He intended on taking it because he asked for it, and then he was withheld from actually acting on it because he's an inmate, and they wouldn't let him go take it.
Correct. So he never actually got the possession, but he did act on it, right? How do you know he acted on it?
Well, it said that they let him go back and get his legal papers from the box.
Yeah, but Nicole, how do we know he acted on it? Oh, you're muted.
Could you repeat the premise?
Yeah, so Yale is saying, and I think he's right, that Hawkins, this property was abandoned, and Hawkins is the first to reclaim it, okay, or first to claim it. And we would claim things by expressing an intent to make it mine and to take action to take possession, right? There's no real doubt that he had the intent to make it his, right? To claim it back. But he wasn't able to actually take possession of his boxes because of the circumstances. But we know that he did everything in his power to get the boxes back in his possession. How do we know that? What did he do?
Well, he requested for his property to be returned.
He asked,
And
okay.
then he filed a suit against
He
the
filed the
prison
suit.
to reclaim
Great.
the property.
This lawsuit is our proof of him asserting his possession over these things. Okay? He didn't just say, hey, give me back my stuff. He asserted those rights all the way up through the legal system here. So this is an important note that you can protect property rights by protecting your property rights, or asserting property rights by asserting your property rights, even in the absence of the ability to take physical possession. Okay, good. So, Yale, I want to ask you one more thing. You mentioned that they distinguished this case from the Heron case. What was different between what the prison did in this case from the Heron case that makes it?
In this case, the prison guards took the possessions and then they put them in boxes and put in storage. While in the Heron case, they took the possessions and then actually distributed them amongst the other inmates and I guess sold them or just gave them out.
So what did they do in Heron that they did not do here?
They acted and with intent.
Right. So it's as though in this case, Hawkins has abandoned his stuff, and then before anyone else, he becomes the first in time claimer of the stuff. In Heron, the other case though that we're talking about, in the interim, the state had taken ownership of the property and divvied it up or sold it or done whatever they do with it. Okay? And that's the distinction. So it wasn't that that Hawkins had some superior right. He just was the first one to claim it. And so there was this, this on 115, the little inset piece, personal property upon being abandoned, blah, 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 blah. Such property may accordingly be appropriated by anyone. So to appropriate it by anyone, that's what I'm talking about with Carly. You intend to take it, make it yours, and you take possession of it. The TV that's sitting by the trash can or something like that can be appropriated by anyone. And then the italicized portion, if it has not been reclaimed by the former owner. So that's a statement of first in time. Anyone can appropriate it, and the former owner, if they beat them to it, they can appropriate it too. And that's exactly what happened in this particular case. Carly, you think this is the right outcome? Do you think this case came out the right way?
I think so.
Yeah, go ahead.
I relied really heavily on the if it has not been reclaimed by the former owner. And he reclaimed it. So
yeah, and so this is the idea that Yale is saying unabandoned, right? Which isn't really a thing. It's just that I reclaim it before someone else has appropriated it. Nicole, what do you think? The right outcome?
I disagree. I think he escaped prison. So he was clearly abandoning his property because he had no intent to ever return to prison.
Mm-hmm.
If you're escaping from that, you don't intend to go back.
Right.
I guess legally it makes sense, but I don't think so.
If he had come back, go ahead, Carly.
I just think that would be the case had they already sold or destroyed the property. But because they hadn't done anything with it, I think this turned out correctly because he beat them to it, essentially.
If he had come back, in a disguise, I don't know, or it's hard to imagine how this. So what makes this case interesting is the quirkiness of the prison element to it, right? If he had come back voluntarily and tried to reclaim it, Nicole, do you think he should have gotten it back?
No, because Well, I don't think anyone voluntarily comes back to prison.
Right. It's
But
hard to imagine that situation.
it's really hard. But also, like, I would go on his original intent to escape.
Uh-huh.
So, no, I don't think he has a right to the property after that.
Okay. I see a few other hands. I'd like to get y'all weighing in on this. So Jasky and then Davis.
So I agree with the majority opinion here and also Mrs. Zant because one, I feel like obviously that the prison didn't assert their ownership over the property. And two, with his intent to abandon the property in the first place, I think that a prison escape is kind of a special scenario because if he had the chance or if there was still the same chance of escaping with his property versus without it, he would have taken his property. But the simple fact that basically if you took your property, there's almost no way you're getting out, like, because you can't carry it, you can't, maneuver it through whatever escape path you have. So I think the court's holding was correct here.
Okay. Davis?
I think this is one of those situations where like the correct thing may not be what we see as like the right thing, because when you look at like the letter of the law, like just like the facts of it, like the court did, the prison didn't intend to distribute it, had his name on it, he came back and reclaimed it. It's like under all like the check boxes of like what the law actually says, it makes sense to be his. But I think because he was a prisoner and he was escaping prison, people want to assert a little bit more like an extra punishment to what he did. So I think that's why it's a little bit harder, like emotionally, I think, just like as normal people to go back and be like, yeah, that's right. But I think it's just one of those circumstances in law where what the law says may not seem totally right, but it's just.
Okay.
So,
Nicole, you think that that's driving your desire to give it to the prison?
Maybe. I guess if it were, I don't know. It's hard to think. It's hard to like think about it in terms where it's like not prison and a prisoner.
Okay.
But
let me ask you this, Nicole.
Yes.
Would it have been that difficult for the prison to win this case? Are we asking too much of them that they just actually take ownership of it and treat it like theirs as opposed to putting it in a box with Hawkins's name on it? It's as though they knew he was going to be captured and come back. Is it too high a bar that we're putting on the prison?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah. They could have won this case very easily.
Right.
They didn't. And who's to blame? Is that Hawkins's fault that they had every opportunity to claim this abandoned property?
Oh no, it's definitely not Hawkins.
Yeah.
There.
Right. I'm trying to make you feel better about the outcome.
I stand by what I.
Okay. Julie and Jack, I see y'all's question. You want to raise a question in the chat. Julie, go ahead. You're mute. There we go. Can anybody hear her?
No.
Okay, now I hear you. I heard you say no. Okay.
Oh my God.
Type it in the chat. Jack, ask your question.
Oh, well, I can hear you, Julie. I don't know if you want to try again real quick.
I'm only hearing like every other syllable from her.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. I was just going to say I liked on page 115, the second to last full paragraph where they say, we conclude that the presumption of inference of intent to abandon one's property based solely upon the acts of the owner is a rebuttable presumption. And I kind of feel like that's what we're talking about a little bit here, especially with Mr. Goff, because they found his intent to abandon it in the first place by the fact that he left the prison. And I feel like that adds to like the special situation of the prison. So I just thought it was interesting that the fact that we can come up with ways he could come back, like say as a grandpa, and he could use his ID and wear a disguise and reclaim his property, like the fact that there's even possibilities like that, or that he could be like, man, I really missed that TV, and like willingly go back and like reclaim it. So it's like I just thought that was kind of
I'd rather have my property than my freedom.
yeah, but because that's just kind of argues like their first finding that it was abandoned in the first place. So I thought that was just kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's not lose sight of the fact that this was abandoned in the first place, right? The outcome makes you think that he did not abandon it. But I think, with you guys, I tried to walk through that he did abandon this property. And so don't y'all lose sight of the fact that he did abandon it. And so what happened is he also was the first to make an appropriation of it, to appropriate it after it had been abandoned. And so he was first in time in that way. Okay, we're out of time. We'll pick up with Vanna White on Wednesday. I'll stick around for a couple minutes, Julie. I'll try to get your question taken care of here. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you, Professor.
All right. What you got, Julie?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Woo, thank God. Okay. My concern is I'm having trouble understanding the fact that the jail didn't establish ownership over the box because of the labeling. Like, couldn't they have just labeled that as like a description of what the property was inside? Like, it was that person's and that's why they're labeling it with his name, but I don't necessarily think that establishes that they're not claiming ownership.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's a good, if you're the lawyer for the prison, that's what you're gonna be arguing, right? And I don't think that there is an absolute yes or no answer to did they claim ownership or not ownership. So the Hawkins name written on the box, the court is saying, suggests that they were asserting that it was still Hawkins's, or they weren't making it theirs yet. But I think I'm understanding your question is, well, why not? Like, if I steal something from somebody, I might write the address of the place I stole it from, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it's mine. And I think that the problem, contrast it with that Heron case, that other case, where they actually divvied up the stuff or sold the stuff in the interim. That's a much clearer appropriation. And so I think that the court is just saying a clearer appropriation is required than what they did here. They could have very easily, even if I honestly think if they had labeled the box, or if they had just dumped the box in with other abandoned property, right? If they had like a lost and found bin or a escaped prisoners bin or something, and they just dumped it in there and mixed it up with other stuff, that would feel more like appropriation than maintaining it in a separate box. But I take your point. It's not so cut and dry that they didn't appropriate it.
It's just that they could have done better in that situation.
They didn't satisfy this court.
Okay.
They might have satisfied a different court.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry about the sound. It was like I couldn't hear. I heard a little bit and then I didn't hear and then I heard and then
Well, and then I muted myself and unmuted myself so you could hear me, but it just made it worse. So, oh well. Thank you.
Got it done now.
Could this not be considered cruel and unusual punishment?
How so? I don't think so, but how are you thinking so?
Because they took his property, whether he abandoned it or not, and in his hearing, they mentioned nothing about not returning his property. And the prison, on its own accord, denied him the right to the property that he asked for, that he's assuming he paid for.
Yeah, so the answer, I think, is that it's not cruel and unusual punishment, but it's a due process violation, which is what he's claiming. It's a taking of his property without proper notice or without the proper process through which he would take it. So cruel and unusual punishment is usually dealing more with physical punishments that are imposed on people.
I just thought it was kind of cool because a prisoner, $2,000 to a prisoner is kind of a lot of money.
Yeah.
To take a property away.
Yeah. Cruel and unusual punishment usually has to rise to a much more significant level than than this would, but it's definitely, his whole theory of the case is based on due process. So he is making a claim that there's some sort of constitutional violation here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, I'm gonna go real quick. I think mine will be really quick.
Mine's quick too, don't worry.
I don't know if you can help with this. You may just have to say, just get the 8th edition, but I realized I have the 9th edition, and there isn't much different because I noticed, I've got somebody walking in my room right now. Sorry. I noticed that, now I lost my train of thought. I noticed that most of the pages are similar, and that's why I didn't even notice they were different until when I was doing my homework this weekend.
Yeah.
And I haven't had any problems except for I've been able to find everything except for I realized I didn't have one of the cases. So do you think I need to go and buy the 8th edition, or do you think I could maybe just ask people when I find something?
That's what I would do. I would get somebody to make you a copy of the case that's missing. I don't know, what case is it?
It's the other one that we had today. And I mean, I can take care of it. I've got a buddy that I know really well in this law class.
That's what I would do. I think, I haven't ever looked at the 9th edition, but I know the difference between the 5th and the 6th and the 6th and the 7th. I've been through 5 editions of this book, and they're usually not so significant. And so I think you'll probably be fine. Just be attentive to it, and if you need, I wouldn't buy. I mean, just from a financial standpoint, I wouldn't.
Got it. All right, thank you.
I think you'll be able to get by.
Thank you.
So the best for last, I guess. My question here, sort of similar to what Nicole was getting at earlier. The train of questions went a different way. I saw that Hawkins abandoned the property, obviously, but I don't understand how he can reclaim it if how he abandoned it was in itself a criminal act, because escaping from prison is illegal.
Yeah, so it's just you just have to compartmentalize those things.
Okay.
It's just like in our example earlier, could be criminally liable for trespassing, but might still win on the property question.
Okay.
And so I think that you should be, I don't know, and I think just different people have different tolerance for that kind of compartmentalization.
Yeah.
I think that you should be, in torts, the principle is something like you should pay for all the damage you cause, but none of the damage that you didn't cause. That it might have resulted in some way, but it wasn't like I didn't really actually cause that damage. And we're going to talk about this later, probably not until the spring, the idea of mitigation of damages. But the basic idea is you should only be liable for the damage that you actually cause. And so too, in the criminal context, there's a similar concept, which is you should be guilty for the thing you do, but extra punishment on top of the guilt for the thing you do is improper. And so the person, had the extra, time was added to their sentence, and they had time in maximum security, and it looked like maybe even solitary as a result of the escape. And all of that is, sort of liability or the consequence of the criminal act. But adding on this extra thing is
cruel and unusual.
Is improper.
Yeah.
Or maybe cruel and unusual. I don't think it's cruel and unusual, but it's he hasn't been tried for that, right? He wasn't punished criminally for that. He was punished criminally for something else.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, again, I recognize that people have different tolerance for compartmentalization, you know, like of the bad things that flow from, or of the consequences that flow from bad actions.
To my understanding of this, and I talked with an attorney buddy of mine. He said, "Yeah, I don't see how he should have gotten the property back, but he didn't." So I was just trying to work through that, I guess.
Yeah, it's a quirky case.
Yeah.
But kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer since you might have another class. So thank you.
See you later.